In 1971, I rode my gold-colored Huffy three-speed Stingray bike to the Plaza Theater just off the square in Glasgow, Kentucky, to see the movie The Legend of Billy Jack. It was a poorly done movie, but it had a big impact on me. It was the Nixon years, the height of the Vietnam War, and this movie ticked all the right buttons for me. It was an anti-war movie, and it introduced me to the concept of pacifism. And as a young man, it was helpful that it introduced me to pacifism with a number of very exciting karate fights, because pacifists usually end up needing to be defended by someone who isn't a pacifist. As an adult pastor, I have been decidedly opposed to war. I've often said that I would like to be a pacifist, but I recognize that our heavily armed world often requires a show of strength to avoid constant invasions and genocides. Still, I can remember saying in many sermons over the last 45 years that I'm so anti-war that I'm already against the next war, wherever it will be. We don't know who first said it, but there's a very old proverb that says, "The first casualty in any war is the truth." From the time of wars with swords and spears, all the way up to our nuclear age, governments have used wars to distract and to unite their population. Sometimes they steal land or resources in a war, but that's not usually what causes it. The value of a war is often just a way to distract a population from their own suffering or from some political controversy and to unite them around a common enemy. Often an absurd caricature of that enemy, built on nothing but lies and propaganda, but often useful nonetheless. In late August, my charming wife, Sunan, was finally able to come from Bangkok to our home in Florida. This has been a great source of joy for both of us, and honestly, some relief to get her away from Thai television. You see, we've spent months together in Thailand, but when I'm back in the United States, we talk morning and night on the phone. There's a 11 or 12-hour time difference between us, so when I'm waking up, she's going to bed, and when she's waking up, I'm going to bed. But we try to chat twice a day. She's been unemployed while she's been waiting for her visa to come through, living in a house with her 3 brothers in a rural province where watching TV is most of what they have to do during the day. The state-controlled news in Thailand contains only what the king wants it to contain, and that is always, at least sometime, devoted to the king's generosity to various charities. And I'm no longer allowed to ask where the king gets all that money that he gives away. And no small amount of thrilling news included in the government-run news agencies about just how bad the people in Cambodia are. There has been a dispute over the ownership of 2 ancient temples on the border of Thailand and Cambodia for centuries. Sometimes when one side or the other needs a propaganda distraction, it has become a regional shooting war. Both of these old temples are Hindu. Neither are in use. I won't butcher the pronunciation of their names, but the larger one's name roughly translates into "in honor of the great chicken." Both were built by the ancient Khmer Empire, which is arguably more Cambodian than it is Thai. The International Court in The Hague ruled about 60 years ago that both temples belong to Cambodia, a decision which doesn't get a lot of airtime in Thai TV. All that they say on Thai TV is that Cambodia shot first this time. That is, whichever shooting war is going on, it was Cambodia's fault. I have heard so much about this from my sweet little 90-pound, 57-year-old wife that I've been afraid that she was going to join the commandos and go and single-handedly defeat the Cambodian army. I shouldn't make light of this, and I absolutely should not tell Sunan that she is just being manipulated by the king's propaganda. Apparently, saying that just once was all that needs to be uttered. It isn't like the USA hasn't done this several times. Most of us can remember that when a security fumble in Lebanon resulted in the bombing deaths of more than 200 American servicemen, Ronald Reagan almost immediately ordered the invasion of the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada, which Reagan said was being overrun by godless communists. In a classic wag the dog move, the invasion was ordered so quickly that our Marines didn't even have time to locate the correct island. They invaded the wrong island, and once their mistake was discovered, they had to run back to their ships and get a better navigator. The invasion of Grenada was not about saving a few dozen American medical students on the island from all those godless communists. It was about saving Reagan from the NBC, CBS, and ABC news anchors. And so it goes. Governments use war to distract and unite their people or their subjects, depending upon how you look at it. While I cannot rationally claim to be opposed to all wars all the time, I still hold fast to the belief that virtually all real wars are the result of failed diplomacy. We cannot maintain peace by just refusing to fight, but we can usually avoid a fight if we manage foreign affairs in a way that resolves legitimate problems without bloodshed. Some problems are easy to see coming, and that makes them more preventable. But admittedly, no one has a crystal ball. Most of us watched the buildup of Russian soldiers on the border with Ukraine, and we thought it was a political bluff on Putin's part. Even President Zelensky in the Ukraine believed that Russia would not invade. In fact, other than Joe Biden, I can't remember anyone saying that it was really going to happen. But it did happen. And now I believe that it would be a tragic mistake to allow Putin to gain either land or power out of this illegal war. The Western world has supported Ukraine just enough to keep it from falling, but not enough to actually defeat Russia in what is becoming a war of attrition. Folks, if I had my way, I would admit Ukraine to NATO today and pull together a united NATO army and push the Russian army back to Moscow and then demilitarize Russia, because clearly Russia cannot be trusted. But then I only listen to pro-Ukrainian news, and Russians only listen to Kremlin propaganda. Evidently, Donald Trump mostly listens to Kremlin propaganda because he's often said that Ukraine started that war. Somehow, in his imagination, the Ukrainians manipulated the Russian army into invading them. Regardless of the degree to which Trump is a Russian asset, this is a real war, and it's having serious consequences. I am pacifist adjacent, but I believe that the world needs to pull Russia's nuclear teeth, to ground their air force, sink their navy, and disarm their army, because nothing less can make Europe safe again. That may show how little I really know about international diplomacy, but we did that to Iraq, and Iraq really didn't do anything to deserve it. Russia is not a civilized player on the world stage. This is not a comprehensive philosophy of just war, and I still like St. Augustine's take on the matter, but I'm going to offer these 3 points. In order for a war in the 21st century to be justified, that war must have an obtainable objective. Secondly, we should have some confidence that fewer people will die as a result of that military action than would have probably died without military action. And thirdly, there must be a path to an end to the war, that the war can be ended in a way that will offer lasting peace. When Germany was defeated in World War II, we left them just enough of a military to defend their borders, but at the same time we made certain that they could not menace their neighbors. 70 years later, we're often asking Germany to spend more on their defense and to send their soldiers to help out in regional battles. But still, it took us a few generations to get to a point where we trusted Germany to play with matches again. I would love for Russia, Iran, and even North Korea to join the world of grown-up, trustworthy nations, but they're not there right now, and they should not be allowed to maintain a military force that threatens their neighbors or the rest of the world. Typically, the profit motive makes nations behave better than any religion or military threat. But places like North Korea have proven that they can endure a lot of poverty while never feeling compelled to play by the same rules of international relations. I say all of this to work my way around to talking about the war between Israel and the people of the Gaza Strip, as well as other local neighborhoods that harbor enemies who feel justified in their not infrequent missile attacks against Israel. Like every other liberal in the world, I am horrified by the suffering in Gaza, the starvation, the violence, the endless military strikes by Israel, the deaths of children and women, non-combatants, that's been going on for nearly 2 years. I'm sympathetic with the call for a two-state solution, giving Palestinians a peaceful path towards a meaningful existence, which includes prosperity, education, productivity, and the prospect of a genuinely happy life. You know, right now it's not hard, to hate baby Netanyahu. Many political commentators in the USA just flatly say that he keeps up the war in Gaza, as well as strikes on Iran, Syria, and the West Bank, just in order to stay in office and, frankly, to stay out of prison. And maybe that's true. But what if you just took Netanyahu completely out of the picture? What do you have left? How do the Palestinians and Israelis get to an end of hostilities that produces a lasting peace? Again, the first casualty in any war is the truth. The Israeli media does not show Israelis pictures of starving babies in Gaza. They do not report on the numbers of deaths, the homelessness, the shifting of the population from one place to another in an endless and exhausting attempt at rooting out all Hamas militants. Sure, Israel isn't like countries like Russia or Thailand, even though Israeli media doesn't broadcast very much that's true about what's going on in Gaza. Israelis have access to other news sources and to the internet where it's not filtered. The problem is, and it probably won't surprise you, that not very many Israelis actually access that external news source. Americans have the information superhighway on our cell phones all the time. But still, in America, the majority of traffic on the internet is pornography and cat videos. Religion is no longer the opiate of the people. Now it's TikTok. In Israel, they don't see the horrors in the lives of the Palestinians. What they hear about are the hostages that Hamas took from Israel and have never returned them. Do you remember how the war in Gaza started? In October of 2023, there had been a ceasefire in place, but Hamas ignored the peace agreement and swarmed into Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking 251 hostages. 378 of those killed that day were ironically attending the Supernova Peace Concert. These were mostly young Israeli peace advocates who want to establish peace between Israel and her neighbors, but they got killed at the concert. Many of the young women taken were raped and they were sexually tortured. Most of the rape victims were killed in the process of being raped and humiliated. Folks, this is grim, but one woman's body was found to have had nails driven into her pelvis. Another had had a knife repeatedly shoved up her vagina. The attack by Hamas against Israel was brutal and senseless, and it was intended to be. It was intended to shock, offend, and outrage the Israelis so that they would retaliate. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are approximately equally divided between those who supported the attack and those who opposed it. However, many of the hostages taken on that day have been housed in the homes of Palestinians. And of the hostages that have been rescued over the past 2 years, none of them have been rescued because Gaza residents helped them or turned them over to the Israelis. The Western media would have us to believe that there is a clear, bright line between Hamas and the Palestinian residents of Gaza. But the reality is that that is not a very clear line. It's very murky. Of the 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, almost all of them were taught from early childhood in their school textbooks that God wants them to kill Jews. Palestinians have, over the past 3 generations, become aid dependent. Nearly half of the population is unemployed, living solely on foreign aid. Many who are employed by the charities that have been sent to offer aid to the poor in the Gaza Strip. There is almost not an economy there. What would it mean to establish an independent state of Palestine if there are no jobs, no economy, no prospect of a self-supporting state? From an Israeli perspective, they see a vicious game of propaganda being played in which Hamas brutally attacks Israel. They do it in a way to provoke an Israeli retaliation, and then when they retaliate, the Gazans cry foul and beg for public attention and international aid, which they get. And when they get it, they use that aid to arm themselves for the next time that they will attack Israel. Almost their entire economy is based on killing Jews. Is it any wonder that Israel is not crazy about the idea of opening the borders to aid trucks? Where does this end? And how can it end? I've said repeatedly through the years that the Western world was wrong to take Palestinian land to create a Jewish homeland at the end of World War II. It was a horrible decision, and it set up conditions for a constant state of war between Israel and her neighbors. What virtually every Palestinian wants more than anything in the world is for the Jews to go away. The phrase, "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," means that they want to drive the Jews out of the land from between the Jordan River and into the Mediterranean Sea. It was wrong when European settlers moved Native Americans off the eastern seaboard. But we can't just now push the residents of New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Virginia into the Atlantic Ocean and give the land back to Native Americans. It was wrong for Americans to take Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and California from Mexico at the bayonet end of pointed military rifles. But we can't just give the Southwest back to Mexico now. If pressured, I would be willing to give them Texas, but we're keeping Colorado. We give certain native tribes large tracts of land to be reserved for them to preserve their culture. But you can bet that if the Standing Rock Sioux started firing missiles into the surrounding communities, I don't think Americans would stand for it. If the Cherokee in Oklahoma went into Tulsa and murdered over 1,000 people and took 251 hostages that they would then intend to rape, starve, and torture and keep them in underground tunnels for a couple of years, things wouldn't be going very well between the native population and the Americans living in Oklahoma. An Israeli officer in Jerusalem told me about 40 years ago, if the Palestinians would lay down their arms, they could be living in peace by nightfall. But if the Israelis laid down their arms first, they would probably all be dead by the end of the day. That is hyperbole, but it's closer to the truth than most of my liberal friends are currently willing to acknowledge. Of course, Palestinians deserve a homeland, but they don't get to just push the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea to take that sliver of real estate, which is now Israel. I am, in principle, in favor of a two-state solution, but the Palestinian state that we want to create has to sincerely and honestly accept that Israel has a right to exist. And in spite of 80 years of rhetoric, we are now nowhere near the point of saying that the population of Gaza is able to do that. Reporters in the West keep calling on Israel to stop fighting. There's a simple way to get that done. Release the hostages, who are to this day being raped, starved, tortured, and held in unlit tunnels under Gaza. If you can't understand why Israel is not willing to end the war in Gaza while these hostages are still being held and tortured, then maybe you're not using your empathy skills very well. Egypt or Jordan could take in the displaced Palestinians, but they don't want to. Does Egypt and Jordan like keeping a couple of million unemployed, angry Arabs on Israel's doorstep? Is it the fact that they want to wipe out the existence of Israel what causes other Arab states to send them so much aid? If we use our influence to force a ceasefire in Gaza, open the borders to as much aid as donor nations want to send, how long would it be before there is another invasion like we saw on October 7th in 2023? What would prevent Hamas or the next terrorist organization that works underground in Gaza? How long would it take for them to organize another attack? What could prevent it? I'm all for peace between Israel and her neighbors, and I'm well aware that there have been plenty of Zionist offenses on Israel's side as well. But where is the workable peace, rather than just calling for a ceasefire that allows everyone to rearm and start fighting again? Where can we go to actually set up the circumstances for a long-lasting peace? How can you convince Israel to just lay down their defenses and live beside a neighbor whose dream it has been since childhood to carry out a genocide against the Jews? Sure, the 2020 Abraham Accords offered a framework for peace in the region between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, but Palestine and Syria were never a part of that understanding. Arab nations will not sign an accord while Israel is still fighting in Gaza. And Israel isn't going to find themselves capable of just going to sleep next to a neighbor that intends to cut their throat. I want the war in Gaza to end as much as anyone, but I want it to end in a way that doesn't just set Israel up for another invasion. The answer to that dilemma, to the best of my knowledge, is not currently under discussion in Western media or Middle Eastern media. We have to learn to speak a common language of peace, because hate speech is keeping us in an absurdly vicious cycle of violence. There are no simple answers in Gaza, but that shouldn't keep us from looking for a complex answer that might have a chance of working.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.